Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Follow us, likes, double tap. Now they control your.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, news. If it impacts you as a Fort Worthian, we discuss it. My name is EJ Carrion, and I'm with my co-host, Ann Zeta. And it feels like we haven't done just a you and I episode in a while, even though it was like two.
I know. Sometimes when we get into a run of having guests, I miss the ones that are just the news and us. And then when it comes time to actually do the ones that are just the news and us, I'm like, oh, it would be really nice to have a guest here.
Yeah. And a lot of you and I feels like we haven't seen each other in forever because we've both been doing work, but basically piggybacking off of each other's representation because we can't be at everything, like March 29th.
Oh my God. That was the day that I swear anytime I saw a calendar invite or any kind of invitation and it was March 29th, I'm like, can we really squeeze another thing into March 29th? There was a lot of stuff on Saturday.
You had the arts forum that you did.
Yep.
How was that?
Arts Forward. It was great. And it was going to be my win. So. Okay.
You don't have to talk too much about it. But then we had the Cesar Chavez March, which we had Paul Chavez there. That was really inspiring. It was an interesting. I think one of my most annoying things is politicians at marches. I think I learned that was my thing, being there.
It's your pet peeve?
Yeah, it's a pet peeve of mine.
There are some people who just show up performatively, not saying that anybody you just mentioned is doing that, but I think that there are people who truly show up at things that they believe in, too.
Yeah.
One would hope.
Yeah.
Those are the candidates we'd like to support going forward, right? Candidates that show up at these things because they truly believe in them.
Yeah, and that was kind of my qualm with the some of the Cesar Chavez people there. I don't think they were there for the right reasons. But shout out to my councilwoman Jeanette Martinez. She dropped this is how frustrated I was about March 29th. I thought I was done with going to stuff, and then she sends me a Puerto Rican festival 2 miles from my house, and I'm like, how do I not know my people are congregating? And and it was popping. It was actually more people there than at the Cesar Chavez March. And I'm like, how do I not know about this? But then it shows me everyone was speaking Spanish. Everyone was, truly in tune with the culture. Like, I would feel like I'm an Americanized, and I grew up in an Americanized setting. So this to me goes to the problem with making change or getting active citizens involved is because America is so diverse, there's worlds of activism happening that is in my backyard, like this Puerto Rican festival that I completely didn't know about. But it's because they were all speaking Spanish. And, every time.
The outreach ahead of time.
Yeah, it was all in Spanish. But there was more people there, and I was blown away how many Puerto Rican people I saw in Fort Worth. And I'm like, there's people out here wanting to get together, wanting to do things. And it's just hard because there's so many of it.
And it's all spread out because Fort Worth is so spread out.
Yeah.
Or it's happening in Dallas, too, which is something that we touched on, that maybe more people show up for big events over there.
Well, I was talking to, my wife about that, too. It's like if we go out to a nice place to eat, we sometimes feel like there's not enough diversity in the room. And we're like, I feel like we have a black and brown middle class, but I then go out to eat in Crowley with a friend. I'm like, oh, this is where all the middle class black people are. So it's like, you're right. It's so spread out that it's hard to you really have to go out of your neighborhood and you have to go out of your way to see all the magical communities sometimes there are in our city.
Well, we went to a Turkish restaurant last night and it was pretty diverse.
That's awesome. Alrighty, well, let's go ahead and move into our short stories. As you guys can see, the title of this one is Where Do Fort Worth Democrats Go From Here? But before we hit the big story, we have 3 updated notes that we want to hit. So short story number 1 is Wells Fargo is leaving its tower in downtown Fort Worth. Wells Fargo plans to move out of downtown Fort Worth office tower that bears its name and move into the Clear Fork building. The bank will anchor the offices at Clear Fork, a 70,000 square foot mixed-use building under construction in the luxury mixed-use development of Chisholm Trail Parkway, about 5 miles southwest of downtown. The property is expected to open in the second quarter of 2026. Wells Fargo's will be leasing roughly 39,000 square feet, or 78% of the 3-story building. It's a Class A office. The building will also have 22,000 square feet of ground floor retail restaurant space. It's expected to cost roughly $15 billion $15 million to build. Another anchor leaving downtown. You were just mentioning that you and Jim were downtown and it was busy.
We went through last night when we were doing gallery night. And so we went to some galleries that were on the edge of downtown and then went through downtown to get back to near South Side for some other galleries. And it was very active downtown. There were pedestrians on all the sidewalks. Restaurants seemed to be really active. And I made a comment about how this seemed like a pretty active downtown for it being dead, which constantly we hear from people that downtown Fort Worth is not active. And Jim commented that during the day, it's definitely not as active as it was pre-COVID. And that's absolutely true, because I think that coming into the office in person and all that has not rebounded. It has rebounded more in Fort Worth than some other places, but it has not rebounded to pre-pandemic levels. And so he's correct that during the day, it is not as active as it used to be. But I would say at night it is. But an anchor like Wells Fargo leaving one of the towers downtown is definitely going to take more people that might have been active during the day away from downtown. And I think it touches a little bit on the subject that we briefly talked about on our last pod about areas in Fort Worth competing amongst themselves. So Magnolia and South Main and Clear Fork taking things there. I mean, Neiman Marcus was at the mall, Ridgemar Mall. Now it's in Clear Fork. But even smaller shopping centers within Fort Worth compete against each other, because the University Park Shopping Center had some stores that are now in Clear Fork. And so people seem to always be going and looking for the shiny and new. And it's easier to build shiny and new with all of the things with no constraints. Like if you can build parking garages and have brand new parking nearby, that's much easier to do on a greenfield development site like Clear Fork than it is in a downtown environment or other urban core areas. But it's still pretty centrally located. But I do have one bone to pick with Clear Fork, and that is somebody needs to talk to Trinity Metro and figure out how to serve that whole thing with public transportation. Because they got plenty of parking in those garages, and it's free, quote unquote free. But it's not served by transit, and so people have to drive there. And I think some people who work there and other folks, in the service industry would make it challenging.
Clear Fork is somewhere where I think actually is another diverse group of people eat at, though. Like that's another where, like if I go to a restaurant there, it's a diverse dining of people eating. But I always go back to the data that when we had the geographer person on, Kyle, the professor at TCU, how the fastest growing population in the loop of Fort Worth are white people. The fastest growing out of the loop is Hispanic people. But anyways, we just wanted to update you guys there. We're going to move into another story. This story is about Trinity Valley School, a private school, an affluent elite private school. March 27th, an article came out and it was about, it looks like 16 girls are allegedly, their parents are suing a Trinity Valley School piano teacher for sexual abuse and the school for covering it up. The suit, filed March 26th in the 153rd District Court of Tarrant County, accused the school and its board of negligence, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The plaintiff says at least 16 elementary and middle school girls were abused by a former piano teacher during the 2022-2023 academic year. There's 8 families represented. Muse was arrested in June 2024 and indicted by a Tarrant County grand jury on 5 counts of indecency with a child and is currently in jail, according to the filing. Muse engaged in repeated sexual abuse, including exposing himself, coercing students to touch him, and creating sexual exploitative games for students in the classroom. The real truth so far of all of this, like what we know of, is that he got fired.
There was an incident in April of 2023, and he was promptly terminated from his position at that point. And so all of this additional reporting has come to light since that happened.
And his excuse was he forgot to zip up from using the bathroom, which, if you're any male, you would know that's a crazy excuse. The reason why I shine light on this and the reason why, Anne's like, oh, well, why do you want to make this a short story? To me, it's because we're in the middle of a conversation of getting tax dollars to allow to go to places that are not public schools, that don't have the accountability or the measures around family engagement and around when families do call out a problem, where if this was a public school, these kids' voices could have been heard more. There could have been maybe more due diligence in the process. And I think, when I look at the news today in Fort Worth, it's Keller ISD, an affluent suburb. It's Trinity Valley now, which we'll see where this goes, which is a premier private school. And you got Mercy Cultures, unvaccinated, leading the state of Texas. Positive Fort Worth ISD, when you have a superintendent who's about keeping their nose down and putting in the work, they're apologizing to the North Side cheerleader. They're out here really making it about school. And it's really, personally, the win here is that the public schools, to me, are sounding like better schools, is all I'm saying here. And it's like the argument of what makes a better school. How is Keller ISD and South Lake ranked as better schools, yet they're the ones with banned books? They're the ones with Patriot Mobile school boards. And so I think if we don't talk about when high-end schools, we don't give justice to when we always want to complain about our public schools not being high quality.
Yeah, there is quite a constant refrain of failures on the public school side, and I think that we tend to just harp on those stories. And I think the accountability piece, the training piece of being able to identify when things are happening and having feedback loops in place where when something happens that you follow a protocol and a procedure in order to ensure that things are handled properly, can happen in a public school situation. And maybe those were not in place in this situation.
And so we will continue to see where this goes. The attorney representing the family said, quote, "We believe the evidence will show that the school in this case created the conditions for the serial pedophile to continually assault and traumatize these kids. But we wanted to make it news because obviously most of us probably don't send our kids to Trinity Valley, but that there are also this news happening on the West." The next thing we want to discuss and talk about is an urgent, I've gotten multiple texts about this. It's the SB 31 HB 44 state bill. And basically it's around abortion rights. And they're calling this, quote, the life of the mother legislation. And it's the Trojan horse to the agenda that the GOP has.
Yeah, I think getting back a backstory on this, there has been over the last few years since the abortion ban laws have gone into place in Texas, concerns raised by people across the board about how there has been uncertainty of when a doctor can perform a procedure. And so this was purported to be legislation that would address that so that there wouldn't be these ambiguities in when doctors can step in. And so this bill, unfortunately, would allow states to prosecute abortion funds, helpers, and even patients. And so while it has convinced some Democrats that it is going to help doctors understand and protect the life of the mother and clarify the state ban, there's some concern that there is what you just mentioned, a Trojan horse in this bill, that there's a 100-year-old ban hiding inside it that really would be revived and could be used to prosecute abortion funds, helpers, and possibly even patients.
There was also a Chris Tackett's blog, See It, Name It, Fight It, also talked about the list of Democrats who are supporting this bill, which is kind of the challenge of this bill, is that they tried to make it pro help the doctor and didn't realize the back text, kind of what you were talking about, this 100-year-old bill, which basically would, Ken Paxton's goal is to be able to prosecute those who help, quote, procure abortions. That could be people who fund. These could be friends who help out. A court said that the 100-year-old bill was unenforceable in 2023. The language in SB 31 and HB 44, which is identical, actually amends an element in the 100-year-old bill. By doing that, there's a legal argument that will resurrect all of the 100-year-old language and give Ken Paxton exactly what he wanted when Roe fell. And so there's a miscommunication, obviously, because our Democrats at the Senate and House that are involved, I'm going to name them all, and then you let me know if any of them are Tarrant County, if you do know or do not. Sorry, we did not get the opportunity to manage that before the show. Carol Alvarado, Donna Howard, Anna Johnson, John Bryant, Cheryl Cole, Maria Flores, Aaron Gomez, Linda Garcia, Vicky Goodwin, Ana Hernandez, Suleiman Lalani, Terry Meza, Joe Moody, Penny Morales Shaw, Claudia Ordaz Perez, Vincent Perez, Ron Reynolds, John Rosenthal, Lauren Ashley Simmons, Charlene Ward Johnson, Jean Wu, Aaron Weiner are on those lists. I think one of the biggest, there was a lot of Hispanic names, so I'm also assuming maybe San Antonio, Austin, or even more closer to RGV area. And I think as politicians, where I think a lot of Hispanics are conservative because of their faith and the pro-life, this could be where they probably didn't realize they were trying to be bipartisan or meet their constituents, but they don't actually realize how this could be harming what they say they believe in if they're saying that they're progressive Democrats fighting for abortion.
The only real upside is that it removes some vague language about life-threatening conditions from the original ban, but it's a very nominal change, and it doesn't make abortion any more accessible.
And Texas women showed up on March 27th to testify against the bill, and you got to see their stories. It was powerful. I mean, one lady said, "I'm an 8th-generation Texan," and her talking about how her family was impacted by this. Super powerful stuff, and highly recommend to calling these people and to making sure you hear your voice on this. Texas is trying to be the example of what anti-choice, anti-women's rights, and we have to be able to name it when we see it. All right, so we're going to move into the big story. The big story is what we are really excited to talk about is, where do Fort Worth Democrats go from here? There is some news that are coming out that Tarrant County, and I'm going to start with this, Ann. I know I didn't give it to you in this order, but I just think I want to start with the hope, right? I want to start with the macro hope. We went with this title and this to be the main story because we read a blog by G. Elliott Morris, Strength in Numbers. He says Democrats are winning special elections like it's 2018. And what's powerful is that there is news from a March 25th special election that a Democrat won an election in Pennsylvania's 36th state Senate district, a seat where residents voted for Donald Trump over Kamala Harris by 15 percentage points in 2024. And in 2020, when it was Trump versus Biden, Trump won 17 points. And now that red seat is held by a Democrat. And what you're seeing in this blog, the biggest swings are in where of these 14 special elections, there has been positive swings to the Democratic side. So much, you have in Iowa, it was a 25% swing, a 25-point swing, to another Iowa 24, a Maine 19, Pennsylvania 16, Connecticut 16, Minnesota 13. That Pennsylvania seat was a 12% swing, Virginia, Delaware. So what these swings are happening, and so this is allowing that the average swing in a special election so far is 10 percentage points to the Democrats. And so a lot of this is talking about how when you have general elections, less involved, less educated, less informed people end up getting involved in voting. But nationally as a whole, special elections benefit Democrat voters. But obviously we know in Texas and in Fort Worth, that usually benefits Republican voters when we have small turnouts. And so Republican judges, Republican seats usually win, where we usually benefit the opposite with the general election. That's when Beto wins. That's when Biden wins. And that's when a lot of seats turn Democrat potentially. But yeah, so I wanted to bring up that high note there. And I know you attended the Cowtown Democrats discussion, and kind of we both been hearing some of the fragmenting and structure foundational bases being vulnerable in the Tarrant Democratic Party.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about this in our prep, about how there's a lot of different groups in Tarrant County that are Democratic groups. And I made a point of, there's a women's Democratic group, there's a Southwest Democratic group, there's a young Democratic group, there's the Cowtown Democratic group, there's just all these different groups. And I'm like, So do I need to belong to all of them? Do I need to go to all of their meetings? Are they coordinating with each other? And I know there is some effort to do some coordination, and I know some folks that are really trying hard to communicate with all of them so that they're not duplicating efforts and that they can collaborate and strengthen each other's efforts versus, infighting or not knowing what everybody else is doing. But to your point about attending forums, we have municipal and ISD and water board elections coming up. And so there's a variety of opportunities to hear from these candidates. And some of them are being hosted by Democratic groups. And so the one I went to earlier this week was the Cowtown Democrats, and they invited I think they only invited Democrat candidates or people who identify as Democrats. And like I said, these are nonpartisan races. So we can discuss that. I know there's people who are like, nothing is nonpartisan anymore, and we should just give up this idea of trying to be nonpartisan. And then there are people like me who cling to the nonpartisan for municipal races, but we're not going to discuss that today. So I believe I'm not sure if they sent out invitations to everyone. There was clearly a couple of people that showed up that were not on the list to speak, and they were sticking to just having the people, I guess, who responded to their invitations. But there were some folks that showed up that said that they didn't know about it until the day of. The format of this event was not a panel for each seat where they were in any kind of debate or answering questions. It was literally allowing each candidate to speak for 5 minutes. And they had candidates from all of the council districts and the mayor, but not all of the candidates for those. Just the ones, I guess, that accepted the invitation or heard about it and came. So that brought up you and I discussing the fact that there are 2 candidate forums coming up in the middle of April that are hosted by a combination of organizations, the Fort Worth Report, KERA, and Steer Fort Worth being some of those organizations. And some of those panels are not including all of the contested races. And so I had a question about that, because back in 2021, as excruciating as it was with 10 candidates on the ballot for mayor, almost every panel that we participated in included everybody. And what that ends up doing is having a very limited amount of time for each candidate. And there are some folks that run for office that probably have another reason other than thinking they can actually win. And so they kind of use that as a platform to either get the word out about something else or, whatever their reason is. And so whether or not organizations that are hosting these panels should be making decisions about whether a race is, whether or not these organizations that are hosting these panels should be making decisions about whether a race is, whether or not these organizations are making decisions about who gets to be on these panels and whether these races are competitive or not. So I was curious as to how decisions were made on the candidate forums that Steer Fort Worth, Fort Worth Report, and KERA are doing. And they indicated that they chose the most hotly contested and highest profile races, and noted that unfortunately time prevents us from having forums for all the races. All other candidates are welcome to attend, but candidates involved in the forums or not are not permitted to hand out their material of any kind inside the building. So that means that in the case of the panel that's being held on April 16th, they are having candidates in the following races. And they're calling it a debate, so I guess they're actually going to have a debate. The mayor's race, District 5, District 6, and District 9. Those are not all the contested races. They're not all the seats that are just open seats. 5 and 6 both are open seats, and so it's no incumbent. The mayor's race is a contested race, and I guess I don't know what their definition is of hotly contested, because there are contested races in District 3, and that's not being included. But there's a contested race in District 9, and that is included. Yeah. So who's determining whether District 9 is hotly contested and District 3 is not? And what is the threshold that decides that?
And I mean, you had to deal with this. I mean, District 9, the most progressive district of the districts, has constantly had to show up and show out itself more than the other districts. So it continues to be a thing where now Elizabeth Beck, who is having to deal with her seat, fighting against some, Republican person who really doesn't have a chance. You can't say that person has a chance to Beck any more than Jason Ballman does to Michael Crane in District 3. And yet Jason Ballman doesn't get the chance to even try. And so that is, I'm personally disappointed here on Fort Worth Report making these decisions, because also these panels and the recording of hearing people's ideologies and talks actually influences who they pick for. When I remember me and Jimmy endorsing you, I had no idea who you were. I didn't know who you were. And I would just watch the panels, and I watched Maddie talk. I watched Deborah talk. I watched Dr. Bird talk, and I watched you talk. And I said, wow, I think this person is the person who gets it. And so when you don't give people that opportunity to hear other ideas, hear other perspectives, you're playing decision maker. And that is what fair, when your mission is to be fair and local, that is not what Fort Worth Report is doing with this process.
Well, and they also talk about needing to fill a pipeline and have younger candidates, there in order to move up and be ready to serve in these roles. And if you don't have the ability to run in a race that maybe is completely not competitive, but it elevates your voice and allows you to get better and to learn more and to present. And, we've had candidates in the past who have run in races that you clearly would say they were not competitive. Chris Nettles ran against Betsy Price. And I think most people pretty much knew that was going to be a long shot. Yeah. But then he ended up running for city council and winning that seat. And he had several go-rounds. I think he ran more than once before he ran for the council seat that he
And he was one of only two standing up against Mercy Culture. Right? So he was one of only two standing up against nepotism with Jay Chapa. So if you're going to get change, you have to allow the players play.
I mean, I can say that I've judged a little bit. I went and looked at people's campaign finance reports, and I see how much money certain candidates already have in the bank. And then you look and you're like, that's going to be really hard to overcome.
Yeah, but to me, is it money? Because we've seen candidates win with not winning because of the most money.
Yeah, I think Jared Williams definitely did that in District 6.
Because that's also not fair to do it by money, and that makes it competitive. Because I would just do it by data. There are more Democrats in District 3 registered than Republicans in District 9. All right, competitive, done. So the money thing is, I think, always thing that Fort Worth is obsessed with. And if you're talking about money raised, like we have Macy Hill having a fundraising campaign and no one's going against her. And you know what she's going to do? Raise more money than Jeanette Martinez, who's going against two people and somehow has to get on panels against two people, another Democrat seat that has to go through these things. And now Michael Crane finally has a candidate that he should have to stand and talk to in a panel. We don't do that. But we are okay to do it when the progressives have one candidate, show up. So, yeah, I think you brought up a good point here. I mean, it was frustrating in 2021 to have to narrow down our comments to 1 minute because there were literally 9 or 10 people on the stage. Yeah. And that was really frustrating and it's exhausting. But I think that it's important. And I think that it's kind of the same as when people are dismissive of the folks that show up and make public comment because they're, rattling on about something that they don't think is important and they just dismiss it. And I just don't think that anybody should be dismissed. And I think we need to figure out platforms and forums where more information can be shared and people can get out their message more clearly. Because,
you can't depend on the individual voter to go and find this information out themselves. Every election cycle, people are asking me where to get information, and I do my best to share that information with people. I, encourage people to look at the League of Women Voters, and you'll see that sometimes candidates don't even fill out their questionnaires, but that's saying something. If a candidate doesn't show up somewhere where they could get their message out, then that's something to consider when considering that candidate. But I think the lessening of opportunity and platforms for candidates, regardless of the competitiveness of their races, is going in the wrong direction.
Yeah. So there's other parts of this story. So we kind of started at the city level where we feel like where do Fort Worth Democrats go from here? You're having these young voices trying to show up, trying to do something, but not getting seats. But now we also got to talk about the association as a whole, the county. There has been talks, and there's things that, again, we're giving you a story that we probably should talk about next Sunday because the news articles will show up with a little bit more data. So a lot of things me and Ann are going to share with you next is really people just coming to us, kind of giving us a heads up, or, and so not necessarily everything we're saying could be 100% accurate, but we do think it's concerning. And so one of those is Tarrant Democratic Party's funding and, them being on the verge of not being able to pay rent, having to let go of staff. Sources sounds like they found a way to pay rent, but they have let go of staff. So clearly something we've talked about on this pod a million times is the lack of funding in the Tarrant Democratic initiatives. And I wonder what you said earlier, which one do I fund, also plays to it.
I mean, I think having a clear idea of what your money is going to go towards holds some people back. I think in these uncertain times, which I've been hearing from some folks that are just holding back putting money into anything right now because they're just not sure where the need is going to be. And there is so much need. That's the thing too, with all of these federal cuts and all these grants that are being restricted.
Which that was another part of this list of things to talk about is how the Tarrant County Commissioner's Court is having discussions around rezoning and redistricting, and really making it difficult for the current Democratic representatives when they run their races again. So that's Commissioner Simmons, Commissioner Miles. And so the chair, Tim O'Hare, is using an outside lawyer in his pocket to audit and assess how the line should be drawn for this upcoming future county races.
Well, and the interesting thing also is it's not on a 10-year census tract cycle. This is completely out of cycle.
Which is crazy.
Which is not the normal way of doing things. This is a weird thing to be doing. And
so is it him pushing, it's Tim pushing something that he shouldn't because it usually is, or is that something it's always been weird in Tarrant County?
No, well, I don't even know when the last Tarrant County redistricting happened, but I know that when the city does redistricting, and I believe the state too, they do it in the 10-year census cycles. So 2010, 2020, and they got the numbers in 2020 and then didn't end up doing the redistricting and adding the council districts that Fort Worth did until 2024, three or four. So to do it outside of, you can get data that helps inform stuff, but the census is like when you get all the data.
Yep.
And it would hopefully then be based on more, pure results.
Yep.
Not just trying to accomplish something.
Yep. It's going to be interesting because there's also, we're seeing from sources and from people who work at the county that there could be massive layoffs at the county that could really also impact the morale or the power that our judge has. We're talking 150 to 300 people might be losing their job in Tarrant County.
Yeah, I've heard from a couple of people that that's something that's coming. I don't think it should be shocking because their whole goal has been to reduce the tax rate, and that's how they pay these people.
Yep.
I think that federal funding has come down, and so some of the grants that they were getting to do some of this work has come down. And it's anecdotal, but I've gotten 2 emails from people I know personally that I've done work with that were doing work on the Tarrant County side, specifically in transportation and community health, who are no longer going to be with the county. So just letting me, so 2 people I personally know have already announced publicly that they are no longer going to be working for the county. So that's very anecdotal, but we've heard from a couple of people connected to the county that these massive layoffs are coming.
Yeah. And again, these two kind of things we're recording on Sunday, we haven't seen stories on, but we imagine these are the breadcrumbs that are starting to lay out. So again, where are we when we talk about Fort Worth Democrats? We hear about these national special elections. We see the anti-oligarchy tour with Bernie Sanders and AOC and Greg Cesar getting tens of thousands of people. So there's excitement.
And there's Texas connections to these. So Greg is from Austin, and Beto has been doing tours with Tim Walz. So they've been doing that in Texas. So, and then we also just elected a new chair of the Texas Democratic Party. The Texas Democratic Party is proud to announce the election of Kendall Scudder as its next chair. He's the son of a paramedic and a corrections officer and a graduate of Sam Houston State University. And so this article from Texas Democrats is basically announcing that he's been elected.
The Texas Democratic Party's governing board on Saturday elected Kendall Scudder to lead the party forward as its new chair after a devastating performance in November. Scudder took 65 out of 121 votes outright, winning in a majority between a 7-person race. So his background, it seems like what I'm seeing here is that in this decision, we chose youth. He's a younger individual. He got his start with Texas Young Democrats, and he has the buy-in of what feels like the Texas College Democrats and the Texas Young Democrats. So there seems to be like the state is making the bet and initiative to finally bet on young people.
And I think there's some of that percolating in Tarrant County. So there are the young Tarrant County Democrats, and then the Cowtown Democrats are being led by a very young and energetic individual, Jeffrey Hyder. And so I think there's some of that percolating, and we just had a conversation earlier today with somebody who's doing a lot of work in Tarrant County Democratic politics, and she was basically saying it's important that we listen to these young folks and let them do some things. And I think one of the things that has held Tarrant County back is the fact that there's kind of an old guard that has been doing things for a really long time that are very much like, well, we've not done that before, or we have to follow this rule or that rule or the way that we've done things in the past. And I think that there's some energy behind the idea of listening to younger folks.
Yeah, the old guard Democrats have this weird obsession of like, we worked this hard for 30 years at losing. So, but some reason, because we worked that hard for 30 years, we still have the right to choose what's winning. And it's like creates this like weird, person you respect and person you're thankful that they put in the work, but then that they feel like, hey, even though I maybe didn't get the access or the opportunity that I would have liked or make as much change, I feel like I'm holding the gavel to knight the next group of people, which doesn't help when that's just not how, like, we live in a decentralized world, and you have these like younger kids who grew up on iPhones, who grew up on social media, and now you have all these groups and all this excitement happening with young people where you're not even talking to, those people. Like, we're really talking about like 70-year-old legacy Democrats knighting like the 55-year-old Democrat as the young person. So it's like when we really need to be looking at these like 25-year-old kids.
Well, it's funny because people have said to me, like, what are you going to run for next? And I'm like,
people say that to me about you all the time.
Too old. I feel like I am that 50 plus second knighting, and I'm like, let's skip right over me. Let's just go down to these younger folks with more energy and more understanding of the ways that people communicate in this day and age.
And so Kendall seems to be an example of what the state is looking to do. But I just don't know where maybe we can get one of the young Texas Democrat groups from Tarrant onto the pod. You mentioned Hugo and support some, so maybe we can ask them to come on the pod to hear maybe what their strategies and plans are. I also want to know, because I feel like the Tarrant Democratic Party either doesn't know about our pod, which is on them, or they think our pod is just always nitpicking them. I do think they're trying to do a lot with less. I mean, like, I love Crystal Gayden's recent approaches of like doing more press releases and like doing what she can with the access they do have. One of my favorite things was her just releasing outlines of right-wing extreme groups and Patriot Mobile, True Texas Project backed candidates. So she made a list here, and it shows you who is endorsed, and it's everyone you shouldn't want to back. So the Texas True Project is, for everyone, that's the group that tried to do that conference at the Fort Worth Botanical Gardens around replacement theory and Christian nationalism, and several people like Don Huffines even tried to get out of talking there because he didn't realize what those groups are. Those groups are pitting their listed of recommended candidates, and they're recommending Charles Lauersdorf, Mary Kellen Herr in Council 5, Marshall Hobbs in District 6. These are some key races. Amanda Inye for Fort Worth Place 1. A charter school employee wanting to do Fort Worth ISD work, or has also kids go to charter schools. So there's just so much here. And then they have the Patriot Mobile, who has received Patriot Mobile dollars. Really, we're only seeing Keller ISD Place 2 and Grapevine Colleyville ISD Place 3 receiving those. But I really appreciated these kind of press release that they are doing, and I think continue to be productive. But one thing you said is that people are stuck and they don't know where to put their money today. I'm interested to watch what happens, because is the Bernie, AOC, Greg, Cesar kind of group, every time I hear a progressive or someone disappointed in Democrats, they're like, oh, I'm part of the working class party. Oh, I'm with that AOC Bernie Sanders now. Like, I'm with the let's get out of it. And to me, I'm actually, if you're asking me what we should do, we should fund grassroots organizations that are on the outside of the Democratic Party. I think it's time to do that. And then by doing that, I think what you see is the Texas Democrats now pick the young guy to be their rep. So it's kind of like, I'm not trying this I don't want to make it this direct pair, but it's kind of like what happened with the Republicans, right? Like, Donald Trump was like this outside dude, and they're like, oh, there's no way. And so in 2016, they all didn't really agree, and they said a lot of bad things about Donald Trump. But now in 2024, they're all kissing the ring, and he's the main agenda. And Project 2025 is the ecosystem of, and they all move the much more right. I think that's how we have to do it here. We have to organize and fund the more independent, more bravado, more clear vision of a progressive policies. And then by showing the Texas Democratic organizations that that's what people want, then they mobilize more to the left. What's funny is, I think there is also that abundance culture with Ezra Klein, Scott Galloway's, and the raging moderates that are also saying we actually need to go more moderate. And so we're living in how is this going to pan out? And how is this going to work?
And both can't work.
Yeah. And so, and in Fort Worth, you could feel like the answer is the usual answer is, oh, you got to go more moderate. And I hear like the New Yorkers who move here, or the Californians who move here, they're more pro the working class party model, but a lot of the Fort Worth progressives and Democrats like, oh no, that's not going to work. You're going to have to use this like more abundance build, like red states, open it up. And so I don't know. What is your take on what I just shared?
Come from a stock of people that are probably more on the activist lefter side of things, but having lived in Fort Worth for 35 years and seeing how things butting your head up against the way things have always been and the way things get done, and the identity of Fort Worth being a conservative city, I have kind of fallen into the group of people who have compromised and worked together with and tried to work within the system while still recognizing that the more activist way of doing things is a necessary thing to happen in order for things to actually change, because that compromise, incremental thing obviously hasn't gotten us very far. I chimed in a little bit by saying trying to do both of those things is clearly not getting us anywhere.
It's just, who are you going to bet on, because you don't know who's going to show out. And I actually just think it's, I think
a lot of people just want to support people they think can win. And so that's something that happens too. Even if somebody is being...
But I think winning looks different now, because I'm actually convinced on, like, I actually, when I look at who I vote for, it's oftentimes the person who doesn't win. But that's because I know...
Well, there's a difference between who you vote for and who you stand up publicly and say you're supporting, and not you personally, but people in general. Because you can not publicly stand up and support a candidate and then go into the ballot box when you're all by yourself and vote for whoever you want, and it's not making any kind of public statement. But it doesn't help the underdog get elected if we all do that.
Yeah, because it's a... And I think, to me, we have to just be in experiment mode, and it's not about winning. Winning, to me, is about excitement. What happens? Who gets more people to show up? Who gets more people inspired? We need bold people to just say things that they believe in and deal with the consequences. I think we should just have progressive people running just to see what happens.
Yeah, I think for years and years and years, because everybody thought a Democrat couldn't get elected in Tarrant County, that races have just gone uncontested.
Yeah.
And so then we just don't even have that pipeline that I was talking about earlier of people who, you're discouraged from doing it if you don't have a chance of winning. And then you don't get the expertise and experience of getting yourself to a place where you could be successful.
Yeah. And I mean, but you talked about all of that gatekeeping, which also happens because somehow people want their candidate or association's rep to be involved. And I just think I think what we felt on March 29th is an example of overabundance of associations and events. Like, we're getting to a point where it feels like the way that the internet feels, and there's too many books to read, there's too many new albums to listen to, there's also too many organizations, too many events, and so this
nobody's getting this abundance necessary.
Yeah, so this overflow of stuff
just
creates
burns people out.
Yeah, and it creates no value. And that's where you end up with only like 5 big players, where, Mr. Beast is getting 10% of YouTube. The top artists are getting, the Taylor Swifts and Beyoncés are getting the main, because people can't, you have to really spend a lot of work on niching down and supporting niche. But I believe young people get this, and I believe young people are now trying to avoid corporate macro glow. That goes with the suburban sprawl as well. They're starting to realize, I don't want to do the cookie cutter. I can only pick between 3 house options and they all look alike. I think they want that more creative stuff. So I don't know. So I think they're going to want that in their politicians, is basically how I wrap that up. It's like they rather want people who are true that lose than people who are winning, but they're just maintaining. One of the things that I think are actually shifting in America is that Republicans now benefit from more voter turnout. This is a new statistic. I'll put all the links in here. Wesley Kirk is actually one of the people who I was telling about this, and he didn't want to believe it. And I showed him all the articles and data showing that when you look at general elections, the majority of people are now Republicans. Now, let's be clear. There's people who aren't registered to vote that are probably Democrats. So if you had everyone in America registered to vote, Democrats would win. But so in a way, Democrats in special elections is going to become more of a trend? And does that trend change here in Fort Worth, where because of things like the 817 Pod, Tarrant for Change, and all these other grassroots, Sunrise Tarrant, does now special elections go, can we start winning those in Tarrant County? That's what I would be excited to see. So we're going to move into wins and losses. We like to end on wins, and so we're going to start with our losses. Also, I would love to hear your feedback about the last conversation we just had. Maybe you should come to the 817 Gather, which this April, we're doing it the week before Easter, April 13th, in person, getting together and talking, discussing change and hanging out. If you feel like you want to hang out with progressives, conscious, future forward thinking people, the 817 Gather is the best place to do that. And we've been having a lot of fun building partnership and connections and friendships. Also, if you can't make it in person, you can go on to the Discord, which also says live and active. And I love all the recommendations people have there. My loss is the Keller ISD Heritage Homeowner Association beef that is happening, because I think both sides are wrong, because Keller ISD is backed by Patriot Mobile and we're trying to backdoor their district and splitting it up. But then Heritage HOA is also a home association with people who I also think have bad tendencies, and that's Brian Black, a former Fort Worth City an insurance agent, and Fort Worth City Council member Carrie Moon. They are the ones leading the talk, and what's ultimately is happening, it is wasting school dollars to fight this home association, and it's all a publicity stunt for Carrie Moon, who wants to act like he's influential in his community and he cares about his businesses, and he's often trying to get a seat or make a buck. And so the people who are harmed in this situation are students and resources going to kids, because everyone's trying to get the attention spotted on them as the people making change, when really they're costing real dollars being impacted on students.
So I'm not sure if I mentioned this before, but I may have, because this has been going on for a while. But there are two bills that are before the legislature this session that are threatening funding for DART. And I think I mentioned before that reduction in DART funding would have a negative impact on Trinity Metro as well, because I personally experienced taking the TRE from Fort Worth to Dallas last week for a transit-oriented development summit that occurred over in Dallas, that was co-sponsored by the Urban Land Institute and DART. And it was a fabulous thing. That is not my loss. That was a great thing. But I was on that train with cars full of people that were commuting between Dallas and Fort Worth. We went over at 7 o'clock in the morning and came back at just before 5 o'clock. And the train over had a lot of people in it, and the train coming back had a lot of people in it. And so I just want to reiterate the importance of reaching out to your legislature to tell them that they should not vote to defund and lower the funding of DART. And that bill, SB 1557, is likely to be heard, I believe is going to be heard by the Transportation Committee on April 2nd. And there is an organization in Dallas that is a transit advocacy group, Ride with Data, that has some easy click letters that you can sign on to, put your information into. It populates your representative so that you can communicate with the Transportation Committee and or your individual representative to let them know that you are opposed to this. I literally wanted to print out flyers and go up and down those train cars and hand them out to the people who are on those trains, because I believe that some of them probably don't even know that this is happening. And I'm not sure that, DART can communicate with their riders that way, but somebody needs to. And I think Data is doing a great job of doing that. And so I'll share some links with EJ to share with all of you, that if you're looking for something to do, because we are constantly saying we need to do something and not just lament the bad things that are happening, this is an opportunity to actually do something. And I would encourage you to do that. Communicate with your representatives and try to make sure that these bad bills do not go through.
I appreciate you sharing those updates with us. My win is actually Arlington, Texas. The reason why I say that, Arlington, Texas, do you know that if Arlington, Texas was in 22 other states, it would be the biggest city in the state? Arlington at UTA is the largest college campus without a football team. Arlington is also there was a movement around Black on the Block and supporting Black businesses. And Arlington had one of the largest representations of to what I call Black entrepreneurship and Black empowerment. And so for me, and shout out to the Arlington Report, which is an affiliate of the Fort Worth Report, for writing about this. But I think that constantly shows you what is happening and why Fort Worth is still a small town. Arlington is, to me, doing things better for Black entrepreneurs. Arlington is much more diverse and a way cool place when it comes to just connections and real working people. And if you look at it, it's just what happens to Fort Worth. And now Arlington is doing things better than Fort Worth when it comes to things that cities should be able to do.
So my win is on Saturday, I participated in the Arts Forward 2025 Learn, Experience, and Celebrate Summit. And it was from 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. It was hands-on workshops, activities designed to spark innovation and creativity. There were panels discussing various things, which I participated in one of those as a moderator. And they had a big announcement at the end of this event, and that was that they are partnering with a website called Culturist, CULTURALYST, Culturist, a network for local culture. It is a digital infrastructure for both discovering the local culture and sharing the resources that help it thrive. And yesterday, after the big announcement, I shared this with several people that I ran into on gallery night, and we were pulling it up, and it was still had the coming soon banner under the Fort Worth box, but I just clicked on it just now, and that is no longer the case. It has the welcome to Culturist Fort Worth, and it has the announcement that was made yesterday about how this is going to be long-term support for our community to help discover artists and arts organizations that will help us connect to each other in meaningful ways. It will also give a platform for local artists to be connected to things across the entire country, and I think actually internationally as well, because they've got some participation in other countries as well. So I think there was great excitement in the room last night or yesterday afternoon when this announcement was made. But this is something that I think is going to help build the arts ecosystem. There's been some folks in Fort Worth that have been working really hard to try to improve this in the face of some major losses that we've had over the last few years with the Community Arts Center closing down, and Arts Fort Worth, struggling to do the work that they're doing. Our friend Wesley Kirk doing his great Eureka, bring everybody together and try to talk about the arts ecosystem. And I think this platform will help all of that. And I think folks are super excited about it. So,
well, there you have it, guys. Another great 817 podcast. Me and Ann got to run to other things we continue to got to do all across the great city of Fort Worth, Texas. Keep being great. Subscribe, share, and continue to be a part of the movement.
Control your life, control your life.